Hello everyone, Curtis here again with part 2 of Alphabet Calibration. If you've stumbled upon this video randomly, you need to watch part 1 first, but assuming you've watched part 1, you know how to do Alphabet Calibration. Now in this video I'm not going to be using the Alphabet spreadsheet, I'm just going to be talking about something you can do with Alphabet Calibration, which is raise your level of consciousness. And also later after that, we're going to talk about how to cure health problems using consciousness techniques. But first, raising your level of consciousness. So, the process overall is fairly simple. Basically, what you're going to be doing is using calibration to discover negative beliefs and emotions within yourself, and then you surrender those negative beliefs or emotions, and then you just confirm with calibration that you have fully surrendered them. Because sometimes when you're surrendering, you surrender like half of it and it feels like you've made progress, but it's not fully gone yet. So I'm going to be talking about how to do that using Alphabet Calibration so that we can really make lots of progress spiritually. So discover negative beliefs and emotions, surrender them. Okay, so in this work I've been doing to raise my own level of consciousness over the past several months, I've discovered that, at least in my mind, I think this is true for everyone, there's two forms of negativity. And the first form is a negative emotion, and the second form is a negative belief. Now, a negative belief is when your mind believes something that is totally false. And that belief is also going to be correlated with a negative emotion. So, let's say you get the belief in your mind that, I am ugly and unlovable and nobody will ever love me. And that's like let's say that's a grief belief because you feel sad about it. So that's something that is just a false belief. You're not unlovable. Someone could love you. God loves you. You could love yourself. So it's a false belief, and it might be associated with grief or shame or something like that. So a negative belief is something you believe that's totally untrue, has no reality, and it's associated with a negative emotion. Now, a negative emotion, on the other hand, is something that is associated with something true, but you've chosen subconsciously to feel bad about it. So let's say, you're short and you wish you were taller, but you're not. Well, the statement that you are short might be actually true in reality. It is true. But if you've chosen subconsciously to feel a negative emotion like shame because you're short, or anger, or whatever, then that negative emotion is going to be bringing down your level of consciousness, and you need to surrender it. So we're going to be working with two different forms of negativity in our mind: negative beliefs and negative emotions. Belief is something that's totally false and it feels like a negative emotion, and a negative emotion is something where it's just the negative feeling associated with something that's true. There is no false belief per se. So yeah, there's these two forms. And I'm going to be talking about each one separately because the process is a little bit different. So with negative emotions, you actually don't need Alphabet Calibration to raise your level of consciousness by identifying and surrendering these. Because we have the map of consciousness that lays out all the negative emotions for us. Shame, guilt, apathy, so on and so forth. So first I'm going to talk about the negative emotion process because it's simpler. Step one, step one before these step ones is, first I'll ask if I have permission to raise my level of consciousness by surrendering negativity. In my case, I always have permission to do that because I think it's a very high intention to want to surrender negativity and let it be replaced by truth. So usually you're probably going to get permission for that. But if your intention is off or if something's going on in your life, maybe you won't get permission at the moment. You'll have to try again later. But so first I ask for permission. Do I have permission to raise my level of consciousness? That calibrates as true. And then I will say, I will let consciousness choose the next negativity that I'm going to surrender in order to raise my level of consciousness. And the reason I do that is because there's a lot of different negative beliefs and emotions in my mind and your mind, And, you know, where do we start? You know, like, let's say there's hundreds of negative emotions in our mind. little energy fields that we've attuned to over the years. You know, we feel bad about this, we feel bad about that, we feel bad about all these things that happened in our past. You know, where do I begin the surrender process? Well, the answer is just let consciousness choose for you. So what I'll usually say is first I'll ask permission, I get permission, then I'll test whether the next negativity to surrender, chosen by consciousness in the name of the highest good, is an emotion or a belief. So I'll say the best negativity for me to surrender right now is an emotion. Oh, that test is true. It's a belief. Oh, that test is false. Okay, so I know I'm working with an emotion. So I'm working with somewhere in my life where something is true or something is real, but I have chosen accidentally, you know, unconsciously to feel bad about it. I need to surrender that bad feeling. So the first thing I'll do if it's an emotion is I'll just start at the bottom of the map of consciousness and I'll identify the emotions. So I'll say it's shame, that calibration is false, it's guilt, that's false, it's apathy, that's false, you know, it's grief. Oh, let's just say it's grief, you know. So let's say we have a field of grief, and now the interesting thing is most of the time I don't need to know more in order to surrender it, because I can just ask in my mind, I can ask for the grief to come up for me to let it go. But sometimes I might need to know more, and what I found is that sometimes the negative emotion is actually based on another negative emotion. So let's say I have grief, but then I discover by asking questions, I'll say the grief is based on another negative emotion. Oh, that's true. Oh, the grief is based on shame. So what that means is that I had something shameful in my life, or I had a energy field of shame and I didn't deal with it, and because of that this grief developed. Or you know, maybe it's based on fear. I felt afraid of something and I never faced that fear. I never surrendered that fear, and now I'm feeling grief because, you know, I've come to the conclusion that, oh, I can't face that fear and now I'm sad about it or whatever. So you can ask different questions about the negative emotion to get more details. You know, you can ask, in my experience, I don't actually need to know much about the negative emotion. I just need to know what negative emotion to surrender, and sometimes it helps to know if it's based on another negative emotion. And sometimes you'll have like 3 or 4 negative emotions combined. They're all kind of intertwined. But that doesn't usually happen. Usually it's one negative emotion or one negative emotion based on one other negative emotion. And I'll figure this out just by asking questions or making statements and testing whether they're true or false. So, oh, I have a grief energy field. Oh, it's not based on anything else. And then I'll just ask, do I know enough to surrender it fully? And I'll say, I know enough. And that test is true. Okay. So now I go to the letting go process, where we will use whatever letting go, you know, process that works for you. And I like to use these 3 questions, which are from, I believe they're from the Sedona method. Could I let this go? Or could you let this go? Would you let this go? When? And then I also sometimes add to it, could I let this negative emotion be replaced by peace and love? Would I let it be replaced by peace and love? When? And basically, once you know the negative emotion that you're surrendering, you just let go of the choice to feel it. And I made a note here, all negativity is held onto by choice. We just don't realize it. We can choose to let it go. So I identify a negative emotion within myself. Usually I don't need to know a lot of details about it. I just need to surrender the choice to feel that negative emotion, and then it will go away. And then an interesting thing is that you can actually measure your progress with calibration. You can test and say, let's say you surrender some grief and you feel like you've been successful at surrendering it, and then you test, what I usually ask is percentages. I'll say this negative emotion is 50% or more surrendered. Oh, that's true. It's 70% or more surrendered. Oh, that's true. It's 90% or more surrendered. Oh, that's false. And if you want, you can ask literally like specific percentages, and you can get like, oh, this negative emotion is 84% surrendered. Really, you can get down to like the exact number. But basically, during the letting go process, I usually use these questions, ask them to myself, and I have the intention to let go of negativity and surrender it to God, and to choose peace and love instead, which is what this represents. Could you let the negative emotion be replaced? Could you choose differently? Could I choose, instead of feeling grief, could I choose to feel peace? And could I choose to let myself be at peace? And when you let go of a negative emotion or belief, which we're going to get to next, when you let go of something that's negative within you, typically you will have a feeling that feels like you're having an epiphany. You'll feel like, typically what happens to me when I surrender something negative successfully, is that I have a realization. You'll realize truth. And that is actually the feeling of negativity being replaced by truth and love within yourself. So you'll let go of some grief, and then I'll realize, oh, I just made a mistake. I accidentally chose to feel that grief. I didn't need to feel that grief. I can choose to be at peace instead. You'll have this realization, and it will actually make you happy because you'll realize some truth. And that's actually the feeling of your level of consciousness increasing. Is the feeling of having an epiphany, having a realization, and that realization will always lead to more happiness. And like Dr. Hawkins said, is that happiness is completely correlated with level of consciousness. Level of consciousness is actually basically the level of your happiness. So, yeah, the feeling of successfully letting go of negativity is a feeling of epiphany. It's a feeling of having a realization. You realize something that you didn't know before, something to do with spiritual truth. And but even if you have that realization during this process, be sure to measure your progress with calibration. At least test whether you are done or not. You don't have to test all the specific percentages, but just test, I have fully surrendered this. Test that statement. And if a test is true, you can, I usually confirm a couple times, like, I am done with this negative emotion. Oh, that's true. Okay. I've fully surrendered it. If it's not true, you need to keep doing the surrender process until it is true. Another thing is that sometimes I'll ask how much I've surrendered, and it'll get stuck at like 98% or 99% or something. And then what I'll realize is that I actually need to surrender the desire to be rid of the negativity. Because sometimes what will happen is during the surrender process, I'll get like frustrated or something, and I'll be like, oh, I just wish this negativity would be gone already. And it turns out that that's actually like the ego playing a trick on you to hold on to negativity. So sometimes you actually have to surrender the desire to be rid of negativity in order to be rid of it all, and it'll all just disappear. But you can, if you can calibrate, you can ask whatever question you think of to get more information. Let's say you get stuck at 99% surrendered. You can ask a bunch of questions. You'll know what to ask at the time. You can ask, oh, I'm holding on to something, or I'm not willing to surrender this part of it, or whatever. And overall, it's not too hard to surrender a negativity in your mind. So that's negative emotions. You just identify the negative emotion, ask if you have enough information to surrender it. If you don't, just ask questions, or rather make statements, and test if they're true or not until you realize enough details, and then surrender it using the 3-question process or whatever letting go process you prefer. Now, negative beliefs. This is where alphabet calibration comes into play. However, we're still going to identify the negative emotion, because a negative belief, if it calibrates at the level of shame or grief or whatever, then that means that it is associated with that negative emotion. So first, I'll usually ask, like when I first lay down and start doing my calibrations, I'll ask the next negativity to surrender is an emotion. Oh, that's false. It's a belief. Oh, that's true. Test those. So if it's a belief, first thing I'll do, I'll get permission, all that. I'll identify the negative emotion. I usually start at the bottom of the map of consciousness and work my way up. I'll say it's a shame belief. No, it's a guilt belief. Oh, that's true. Sometimes a negative belief can be associated with multiple negative emotions. So I'll ask, it is associated with multiple negative emotions. Oh, that's false. It's just one emotion. Oh, that's true. If it's multiple emotions, you know, you can ask, you know, oh, it's shame and grief, or oh, it's shame and guilt, you know, whatever. Just ask questions to get the emotions that it's associated with, because it helps to know those. And then what you're going to do is use alphabet calibration to surrender the negative belief. And you're going to do the same process that I taught you in the part 1 video to write out the belief in language that you understand, letter by letter. And once again, you can choose succinct versus full sentence. Now the interesting thing here is, let's say I have a guilt belief. It's associated with the negative emotion of guilt. And let's say the full sentence, I mean, it could be 10 words in a belief, it could be 20 words, and that takes a long time to calibrate. And maybe I don't want that. Maybe I just want to ask consciousness, you know what, can you just give me 1 or 2 words that will tell me what this belief is all about? And consciousness can usually do that. In fact, for me, it can always do that. I have set my intention now when I use alphabet calibration. I am always asking for the most succinct version of what I am calibrating that I will still understand. So I don't want it to be too short, you know. If it's like 2 letters, you know, what does that mean? I don't know. But if it's like 1 word or 2 words, then you can understand that. Usually it'll clue you in as to what the belief is. So let me just give you an example from this morning, actually, and last night. I was working on this last night and this morning. I identified a guilt belief within myself, somewhere where I was feeling guilt in my life. And the word that calibration gave me was, oops, I have my caps lock on. It was neighboring. Neighboring. It gave me 1 word, neighboring. Now to you that doesn't mean anything, but to me, I knew, once I knew that I have a guilt belief and it was neighboring, I knew exactly what it was. I was feeling guilt about my neighbor, who happens to be one of the roommates that I live with. And I realized that I had been casting some judgment on my roommate for some things, and that judgment was actually not affecting this person, it was affecting me. It was guilt within myself, and I realized that I was feeling guilty because of how I had reacted to this person and some things they had done. So that's what I mean by succinct. And then I did the letting go process with the questions and everything, and I surrendered that guilt and the belief, and it went away. But that's what I mean by succinct versus full sentence. A full sentence belief might be like, I feel terrible about what, you know, Stacy said this morning. You know, that, or it'll be more specific than that. But a full belief could be, you know, 10 words, 15 words, 20 words, whatever. Whereas a succinct belief, it'll just give you 1 word or 2 words to clue you into what the essence of the belief is. Now, once you know the essence of the belief and the feeling associated with it, you can just ask, do I have enough information to surrender this fully? You know, you have to know what you're surrendering before you surrender it, in this process at least, because we're doing a very specific surrender process. You know, the generalized letting go process that Dr. Hawkins wrote about, where you just let go of whatever comes up, that works fine. But this is a very specific process where you're zeroing in on one specific negativity within yourself and just surrendering that. So you need to ask, after you've written out the belief and you realize where you're holding that negative emotion in your life and what the belief is, you need to ask, do I have enough information to surrender this fully now? And usually it'll be pretty easy to get the information you need. You just need to know what feeling you're surrendering and in what context. So in my case, the word neighboring meant I was feeling, it was, all I knew was guilt and the word neighboring, but I knew immediately, oh, that's referring to, oh yeah, I've been judging this person that I've been living with who's my neighbor in a sense, so that's where neighboring comes in. And so you'll know usually right off the bat what the words mean if you get succinct words, or if you don't know what they mean, you can ask for the belief in a full sentence. And then you just do the let it go process. I like to ask these questions, but sometimes I don't ask these questions. I just kind of do the process silently in my head. But whatever letting go process works for you, what really matters is the intention. You need to intend to surrender your choice of feeling the negativity. Remember, all negativity is held onto by choice. We just don't realize it. And interestingly enough, I didn't write this out, but what this means is that all suffering is actually by choice. We just don't realize that we're choosing to suffer. Because nothing in life can cause you to feel a certain way. It can only present you an opportunity to choose how to feel about it. So, you know, let's say you go bankrupt and now you're homeless and, oh, you're starving on the side of the street. Well, you can be enlightened while you're starving on the side of the street. Nobody's stopping you from being enlightened while you're starving on the side of the street. It's based on your personal choice. And like Dr. Hawkins once said, is you can love somebody even while they're killing you. You know, if somebody's murdering you and you know, in the field of battle or whatever, you can love them unconditionally even while they kill you. Like Jesus loved us, even when he was being put to death, he still loved humanity. So all negativity is held onto by choice. We just don't realize it. These choices, this whole process is about finding where we have unconsciously stored these choices to feel negativity, to believe in negative beliefs, and then to consciously surrender them. So we're using calibration and alphabet calibration to dig into our subconscious mind and pull up the bad stuff and then just let it go, and it disappears and it's automatically replaced by peace, which is why I use this wording here. It's replaced by love and peace and truth. Measure your progress with calibration. Yeah, so while I'm surrendering, usually while I'm having those epiphany feelings, you know, I know I'm being successful at surrender, but I don't know if it's fully done. So I'll ask with calibration, is it fully done? If it's a no, I'll ask, what percentage is it done? Oh, it's 50% surrendered. Oh, 70, 90, whatever. And that's just like a fun thing. You don't have to get the exact percentage, but it can kind of clue you in as to how successful you've been so far. So let's say you have like a really intense negative belief or negative emotion, and you've been working on it for like 2 days trying to surrender it. You haven't been successful. Well, you can ask, how surrendered is it? Oh, it's 98% surrendered. Oh, I'm almost done. And then you just surrender, you know, the last little bit of frustration related to, you know, that belief, and maybe it'll go away. So this is the process of, let me see my notes. Okay, the next part is the health. Okay, so I didn't write everything in the notes, but I do have more to say about it. So more details. Okay, I couldn't calibrate, so this is just something I wanted to throw out there. I couldn't calibrate until I did this process with somebody else who helped me do it with his calibration. And he was not using alphabet calibration, he was using intuition to find my negative blocks. But it's a very similar process. I use alphabet calibration because I don't really have that good of intuition. Maybe I have some blocks inside me that are preventing it. That's probably true. But I couldn't calibrate until I surrendered the negativity that was blocking me from calibrating with the muscle test. And if you can't calibrate, what you can do is you can find someone who can, and you can ask them, will they work with you in order to find your blocks that are stopping you from calibrating successfully. And then once you can calibrate, you can do all this process yourself. You don't need other people to calibrate for you for the most part. In my case, there was a person that was offering spiritual counseling with the aid of calibration, and I paid him to remove blocks from me, or to help me find what the blocks were, and then we removed them together. And you know, spontaneously after removing several blocks, I just realized that I could calibrate. So if you can't calibrate, you can either work with someone who can to remove the specific blocks that are stopping you from calibrating, or you can use the generalized letting go technique that Dr. Hawkins taught in his yellow book, Letting Go. And you can focus on, you know, can I surrender the blocks within me, whatever they may be, in order to let me calibrate successfully. So that's just a tip for anyone who's watching these videos who has not done muscle testing yet, but you know you're an honest person, you know you have the ability to, you know you just haven't done it yet, maybe you don't believe you can do it successfully. Just use the generalized letting go technique to let go of the blocks to that. Oh, and I wrote that right there. Okay. Now, if you're doing this process of surrendering a negative emotion one at a time, or surrendering a belief one at a time, typically what will happen is after it tests strong that you've surrendered it fully, if you want to, you can calibrate your own level of consciousness. Now, Dr. Hawkins, he did say many times that he wouldn't calibrate people in front of a live audience. And usually that's because many of the people that were asking him, they were asking from non-integrity. There were a lot of times people, if they wanted to ask from integrity, they'd probably ask him, take someone aside who can calibrate and say, hey man, will you calibrate me in private? A lot of times when you ask publicly, what do I calibrate at, it's from an ego position, which is why personally, I never calibrate. If someone asks me to calibrate them, I never share it publicly, like in the Facebook calibration group. I share it privately with them, so that the ego doesn't really get involved. But anyways, Dr. Hawkins did say in one of his books, I believe it was his third book, the light blue book, Reality and Subjectivity. I believe it was that. At one point in the book, he did say, you can calibrate yourself if your intention is proper. If your intention is to honestly assess where you are in the spiritual pathway, so that you know where you are. And that's what I do. I calibrate myself while doing this process, and typically, surrendering a single negative emotion or single negative belief might raise my level of consciousness by 0.1 points, sometimes by 0.3 points. Or sometimes if it's a major block, it can actually raise your level of consciousness by over 1 point. And this is in the process of like an hour, or 30 minutes doing this surrender process. However, usually a block will raise your level of consciousness about 0.1 to 0.3 points on the map of consciousness. Now, what this means, incredibly, is that enlightenment may only be years away, not lifetimes away. Because you can raise your level of consciousness. If you do this, let's say you surrender one negativity a day, and let's say on average that's like 0.2 points per day. Well, that adds up really fast. You can actually make great spiritual progress over the course of a month, or 6 months, or a year. I personally have been doing this on a regular basis for the last several months now, and I've had great success at raising my level of consciousness so far. However, it's not all as simple as that. I mean, it is simple, but the reality is that life can get in the way, and also spiritual obligations can get in the way. So, little example from my life. Like, I usually do this several days a week, not every day, but usually I will surrender at least one negativity within myself, maybe like every other day. What really happens is that you have to have the willingness to take the next step. So it's really a question of willingness. Are you willing to do the work and identify another negative emotion or belief and surrender it? And if you are, you can raise your level of consciousness today, like literally, like right now, doing this process. But if you're not willing, you might need to wait a few days or a few weeks. Who knows? You might need to chill out for a while. In my own life, before I was calibrating, before I knew about any of this, but in my own life, I found Dr. Hawkins' book, Power versus Force, about 11 years ago. And in the beginning, I made great spiritual progress, raising my level of consciousness, devoting myself to truth, and all that. And then I sort of rested for 7 or 8 years. I stayed at the same major level of consciousness for several years, like 7 or 8 years. And that was sort of like a spiritual ripening. And then, several months ago, I got back into the sort of spiritual evolution game, and I've been working on my level of consciousness ever since. And I thankfully gained the ability to use the muscle tests, which has really been helping out. But you may reach places in your life where you need to chill out for a while. So you may go from courage to neutrality overall, with your overall level of consciousness, and then you may want to chill out for like a year and let your spirit sort of ripen and get ready for future progress. You know, my spirit was ripening for about 8 years or so. So even though I say enlightenment may be in years, not lifetimes, you may reach points where you need to chill out for a while and just prepare yourself for the future spiritual work. Also, spiritual obligations may get in the way. What does that mean? It means once you make some progress, you may come to a realization that there's something you need to do in the world to fulfill like an obligation to your fellow man before you let go of that level of consciousness and move on to the next. So in my own life, I wrote a short self-help book a few months ago because I was raising my level of consciousness, and I reached a certain point, and then I became aware that I really need to write this self-help book. And it's a short self-help book about how I use the generalized letting go technique that Dr. Hawkins taught to cure myself of a very severe anxiety disorder. And I looked around on the internet and I saw that, oh, there's still forums for this anxiety disorder. There's so many people suffering from it. They talk about how horrible it is. But there's no cure. Like, nobody out there talks about a cure. And I realized that a few years ago, I had used the letting go technique to cure myself of this disorder, and I realized, oh, I'm qualified to write a book on how to cure yourself of this by using this spiritual technique. So I wrote a short self-help book, and at that point in my life, I realized I have to do this. I have an obligation to help other people who are suffering from what I used to suffer from. And it was almost like there was something in me just compelling me to do that. So I took a few weeks and I wrote this short book, short ebook right now, on how to do that. And that was a spiritual obligation that I had. I had to do it. Like, once I reached that certain level of consciousness where I had the energy to do it, I knew that I had to do it. So spiritual obligations may get in your way. They may be big obligations or small obligations. One of my obligations is actually making these videos. You know, for the last couple months, I've been thinking, you know, I really need to make videos telling other people how to do alphabet calibration. And then finally, like, I've been raising my level of consciousness and doing this process for myself, and I said, you know what, with the part 1 video, before I made that, I said, you know what, I have to make this. Like, I can't just go on to the next level of consciousness and, you know, leave everyone else in the dust and like leave everyone else suffering without sharing this information. It's like Dr. Hawkins said, when he discovered the muscle test and how it can access truth, he had to share it with the world. It was like an obligation. So in your process of raising your level of consciousness, you may reach points where you need to let your spirit ripen. You may reach points where you need to fulfill an obligation. Other things may come up. I don't know. I'm not totally knowledgeable about everything that may come up, but still, enlightenment may be accessible in a few years instead of a few lifetimes. And the interesting thing is that each negativity that you surrender will raise your level of consciousness by, you know, 0.1 to 0.3 points on average. Tends to be for me, at least. And you know, if you do 1 a day, I mean, that can raise your level of consciousness by like 5 or 10 points in a month. You know, you calculate that out, you say, oh, you know, what do I calibrate at? Oh, let's say I'm at 275 right now, I want to get to 600, or I want to get to 540, or whatever. Oh, at this rate, you know, it may take me, you know, 24 months to get there, or whatever. So really, spiritual evolution is within our grasp. And with the muscle tests and knowing these processes, it's really just a question of, are you willing to surrender? Are you willing to discover what's within you, the negativity, and then surrender it to God? Okay, so yeah. Oh, and one final thing that I didn't write down is, interestingly enough, you can actually use the muscle test to count how many negative beliefs and negative emotional energy fields are in your subconscious mind right now, keeping you from being enlightened. Believe it or not, you can actually ask the exact amount of work you need to do to become enlightened. And I'll just tell you, in my case, the other day I asked, and it said 588 negative beliefs and emotional energy fields are within me. between where I am now and being enlightened. 588, you know, so theoretically, if I surrendered one a day for 588 days, you know, perhaps I would get to enlightenment, or perhaps new challenges would arise along the way. I don't know. I've asked with calibration, can this process get us all the way to calibration 600 enlightenment? And it says yes, because apparently this is a pretty comprehensive process. If you can surrender a negative belief, and if you can surrender a negative emotional energy field within yourself, that's all you have to do to reach enlightenment. You just have to keep doing it, keep surrendering, surrender everything to God, and let it be replaced by truth and peace. Something else I was going to say. Okay, another thing. You might be asking, well, how can I have that many emotional energy fields inside myself if there's only you know, so many negative emotions on the scale of consciousness? The answer is you'll have multiple copies of each negative emotion within yourself. So when you're identifying a negative emotion to surrender, and let's say it's shame, well, that's not all the shame. Doing this process, that's not all the shame that's within you. That's just shame in one specific part of your life. Like I said, negative emotion associated with something true. So that's just one specific part of your life where you've chosen subconsciously to feel shame. There's going to be other parts of your life where you've chosen to feel shame as well. So there will be many times, if you're pursuing enlightenment, that you're going to need to surrender some shame along the way, some fear, whatever. So I just wanted to say that. When you're surrendering a negative emotion using this process, you're surrendering one instance of where you felt that negative emotion subconsciously, and it was stored in your subconscious mind. Now you're bringing it out to surrender it. But if you want to get to enlightenment, you have to surrender all the instances of negative emotions and beliefs. Now, down on our next page, I thought about making this a separate video, but I really don't need to. And the reason for that is that we're going to talk about curing health problems by doing this process. So it kind of goes together with this process. So, as it turns out, many negative health problems, you know, back pain, cancer, meningitis, whatever, many negative health problems are caused at the spiritual level in your subconscious mind, not at the physical level. And I've written out some numbers here for you because I asked with calibration, and those are the numbers I got. As it turns out, okay, I had to cut the video a little bit, but now I'm back. So as it turns out, many negative health problems are caused directly by negativity held in your subconscious mind in the form of beliefs and negative emotions. And Dr. Hawkins did write about this in his yellow book, Letting Go, and also his green book, Healing and Recovery. He talks about how he cured himself of, like, you know, a couple dozen health problems or something just by surrendering the negative energy that was underlying the health problem. And he was using the generalized letting go technique, which just means that you focus on like a problem in your life and then you just surrender every feeling that comes up about it, basically. That's what I call the general letting go technique, because you're not picking and choosing negativities, you're just surrendering whatever comes up. But with our process, with calibration, you can ask for consciousness to tell you exactly which negative emotions and beliefs within you are contributing to a specific health problem. So, yeah, you can. The first thing you need to ask is this health problem being caused by negativity, or is it being caused at the physical level? So an example is that some health problems are purely caused by physicality. You know, like if you stub your toe and you break your toe or something, that broken bone is a physical problem. It's not just a mental, like, you know, your bone didn't break just magically because you had negativity in your mind. Although holding negative beliefs in your mind might cause you to be more accident prone and, you know, get into physical things. But anyways, so an example would be of the two differences, health problems caused by negativity versus caused at the physical level. An example is cancer. As it turns out, cancer can be caused entirely by negativity, Or it can be caused at the physical level if you are exposing your body to carcinogens or to radiation. You know, if you walk into the nuclear reactor room and you get bombarded with radiation, you're going to get cancer, and you know that's going to be a problem. And that's not caused by negativity in your mind, that's just caused at the physical level. So I asked about it. I said, consciousness, if we were to tally up every diagnosable health problem on Earth in every human being right now, add them all into one big list, how many of those health problems are caused by negativity? And the answer I got was quite astounding. I got that about 86.6% is caused entirely by negativity held in that individual's mind. And then about 10.5% is caused entirely at the physical level. So an example of that might be like malnutrition. You know, let's say you're starving to death. Well, that's caused at the physical level. That's not a mental problem. And then 2.9% apparently is caused partially at the physical level, but it's also contributed to at the mental level. So a specific health problem might be caused by both. But that apparently is very rare. Apparently it's either entirely negativity or entirely physical. And it's mostly negativity. I mean, 86%, that is a massive amount. So what this means is we can cure almost all health problems that we suffer from, collectively and individually, if we are able to use this process, which if you can calibrate, you know, you can use it. Or you can use if you can't calibrate, you can use the general letting go technique as well. But yeah, so all you do to cure a health problem is, you know, you start out by asking for permission, and then you just ask consciousness to identify the negativities within yourself that are contributing to your health problem. And another thing is, you can also use calibration to properly diagnose your health problem to begin with. But yeah, you just ask what negativities within me are contributing to this health problem. And what I've discovered is that typically the negativities come in like what I call a cluster. Basically that just means you have, you know, let's say you have like 5 negative beliefs and 6 negative emotions, and all those things together are in your mind, just, you know, sitting within you, brewing there. And at some point along the way, your mind or your spirit or your body, something decides to express those negativities within you as a health problem. So, you know, maybe you get back pain, maybe you get asthma, maybe you get allergies, whatever. Dr. Hawkins said a few times, he said all allergies are caused by belief systems in your mind. Well, if you have an allergy that's caused by a belief system, you can use this alphabet calibration process to find out what the belief is and then surrender it. And same thing with any other problem. I believe, I've never been much into the Sedona method. I haven't read the books, but I believe the guy who founded it, Lester Levinson, something like that, I believe his story was that he was suffering from, I think it was cancer, and then the doctors told him he didn't have long to live. This was decades ago, and he surrendered all his feelings about it, and that actually cured his cancer, and he lived for many more years. And he went around teaching people the Sedona method about surrendering negative emotions. So there's many other people that have success stories using different methods of surrendering negative emotions. One of my favorites is EFT, Emotional Freedom Techniques, the tapping system where you tap on acupuncture points. I really like their website because they have a lot of old success stories where people say, you know, I surrendered negative emotions about this illness and it went away, or it got way better. So in my opinion, this is you know, much more effective than the EFT tapping method, but both of them are basically addressed at solving the underlying problem, which is getting rid of negativity in your mind. And so there's a lot of success stories out there that you can read using different methods. But yeah, it really is real. You can actually cure health problems just by doing mental / spiritual work, whatever you want to call this. Now, sometimes a belief that you have or a feeling it might be directly and obviously related to the health problem you're having, but many times it is not. So what does that mean? Well, it might mean, let's say a couple years ago you made fun of somebody that was like going bald and it hurt their feelings, and now you're starting to go bald. And you ask with calibration, you say, is that directly related? And you say, oh, it is. I feel guilty because I made fun of that person, and now the exact same problem is happening to me. That would be an example of something that's directly related. Or you feel guilty about something or something like that. You feel some negative emotion and it's causing the same problem within you or something similar. So it can be directly related like that, or it can be totally unrelated. You can dig up beliefs and emotions within you that don't really seem to have any significance to your health problem, but it just turns out that that's what your mind is doing. It's taking some random negativities within you that makes it feel bad, and it's expressing it as a health problem. And in my opinion, it's almost like our minds or bodies, spirits, whatever is responsible for that. It's almost like it's bringing up these spiritual problems as a physical problem to sort of get our attention and be like, hey dude, you need to, you've been holding on to all this guilt and shame. You need to surrender that. Until you do, I'm going to bug you with this health problem. And so it's almost like God is telling us, like, hey, pay attention to this. And he's like getting our attention by making our bodies hurt or suffer in some way. So yeah. So all you have to do is ask consciousness what negativities are contributing to your health problem, and then just surrender them one by one, and then eventually you can ask, if the problem is fully surrendered. And like I said earlier, I ask consciousness for the best negativity to surrender at this time. I let consciousness choose the next negativity I'm going to surrender, but you can specify for what purpose. Like let's say you have asthma or something, you can say, consciousness, what is the best negativity to surrender specifically that is underlying my asthma problem or my whatever problem. Yeah, so you can just clear out the negativities, and you will come to, eventually you will just realize that the problem is solved, and the symptoms, the actual physical symptoms, can go down as a result of that, and they can even disappear. So yeah, it's pretty simple. Once you know alphabet calibration, once you know this whole process, you just ask for the negativities that are underlying your problem. And something else that's interesting is that it might work for problems that are not just health problems. Like one of the things that I'm doing is using it for like money issues and being like, do I have negativity that's causing this money problem in my life or this other problem? And it turns out that there usually is, if you view something in your life as a problem, there's a good chance that there is negativity within you that is contributing to that problem, or possibly even causing it entirely. Yeah, so just use this process, use calibration, and ask away. You can ask any question about yourself and about what's within your mind, what's dwelling within your mind, causing problems in your life. And you can surrender those problems. You don't have to live with them forever. So a little bit about my success stories so far. So several years ago, I had what's called AVPD, Avoidant Personality Disorder. It's just an extreme anxiety disorder. And it turns out that that was caused entirely by fear within my mind. It wasn't even multiple negative emotions. It was just fear. And I got rid of like 99% of that by using the generalized letting go technique that's taught in the yellow book, Letting Go. That was a couple years ago. And my anxiety around other people, it totally went away, basically. And then years later, several months ago, like 6 months ago or something, when I started calibrating, I went back to that. I said, is that totally cured? And it turns out it was like 98% cured or something. And I had like 1 or 2 negativities left in my mind that was still causing it, at like 1 or 2% of it was still within me. So I cleared those out, the remaining negativities, using this process. But overall, most of it was cured using the general letting go technique. However, several months ago, I said I was working with a therapist who was doing a very similar process to this. to identify negative blocks within me and then guide me in the surrender process. And I worked with him a couple sessions, maybe 3 or 4 hour-long sessions. And after I was doing like one a week, and it was like an hour for once a week. And after a couple weeks, I came to the spontaneous realization, like out of nowhere, that my bipolar mania that I had previously suffered from was gone. And it was actually incredible. It was a miracle, basically, the way it happened. But yeah, we weren't even addressing my mania at the time. We weren't doing negativity, underlying health problems. He was just coming up with whatever was in the highest good for me to surrender at the time. And it turns out that got rid of the exact negativities underlying my mania. I used to suffer from very severe bipolar mania. It was one of the most severe types. It was daily. It was ultradian rapid cycling mania, which means that I would suffer from mania on almost a daily basis, where I would go into these manic moods. And I was on medication up until I did this therapy process several months ago, but I came to the realization that I no longer needed that medication, and so I stopped taking it, and the mania never came back. And prior to that, if I would ever forget to take my pills for like a day or two that I was taking to treat the mania would come back. So it was not cured by drugs or pills or anything. It was cured by this process. So today, it's months later, I still don't have any mania, and I don't take any pills for it. No treatment at all for it. So it's totally gone. So my avoidant personality is gone. My mania is gone. And also, just about maybe 2 months ago, I was doing just this process, on a daily basis, and I was not even targeting my depression. Yes, I had many personality disorders, actually. I had AVPD, I had bipolar mania, and I had clinical depression for basically my whole life, ever since I was a kid. And for the last several years, I was on antidepressants, and they worked great. They got rid of like 98% of my depression. But if I ever stopped taking the antidepressants, it would come back. Like if I missed my pills for a day or two, just by forgetting, being lazy, whatever, it would start coming back. So the pills did not cure it. But just about 2 months ago or so, I was doing this stuff just randomly. I was not targeting the depression, although I guess I could have. But I was not asking for negativities underlying my depression. I was just asking for the next negativity in the name of the highest good to surrender. And it turns out that one day I surrendered, another negativity, and then I just came to the realization. I said, you know what? I feel like my depression is gone. Like, I feel like I could stop taking my antidepressants and it wouldn't come back. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to stop taking them for like 30 days and see if the depression comes back. And so I stopped taking them, and the depression did not come back. I was moody for like a couple days because it turns out that the pills, were affecting my mind in other ways. But after a couple days, I was back to normal, and there was no depression. So it turns out that all 3 of these issues were just caused by negativity in my mind, which is astounding to me, because I used to strongly believe that my mania and my depression were both genetic. Like, I used to believe, this is my life. Like, I will be taking pills for these disorders for my entire life. I really believed that, because I had read that, mania, scientists think it's genetic or whatever. Well, at least in my case, it was all caused by negativity in my mind. So that's my story. Cured that with the general letting go technique, cured these with this process. Right now, I'm working on overeating. For my whole life, I've basically struggled with overeating and being overweight, and it turns out that that is largely contributed to by negativity in my mind. So the past couple weeks I've been working on that, and maybe in a future video I'll let you know if it works. But I've already seen some progress with my appetite decreasing down to more healthy levels as a result of removing some negativity. But I'm not done with it yet, so when I am, maybe I'll make an update video about that and tell you if it worked. But yeah, so apparently you can cure many health problems with just this process. So that's amazing. I once asked months ago, I said, if everyone on Earth knew the letting go technique, just the general letting go technique, and knew how to surrender negativity, like, how much could we reduce our healthcare expenditures? You know, people talk about how healthcare costs so much and all that stuff. I said, how much could we reduce our healthcare expenditures if everyone could surrender, you know, was taught how to surrender negativity? And consciousness told me about 95%. And said we could probably reduce our healthcare expenditures by 95% if we knew how to cure all these problems that are caused by negativity. Just by doing that, because it's free, you know. This process is free. It doesn't cost anything. Anyone can let go of negative emotions for free. So just imagine, you know, telling someone that is dying of cancer or that, you know, has some kind of horrible problem, that, you know, for free, if you just work with this, you know, for a couple weeks, maybe, you know, a month or two to surrender negativity, your problem will go away and it'll be cured. You know, that's quite an amazing claim, but I've seen it in my own life with these issues. And like I said, many other healing methods that also rely on spiritual healing or mental healing. There's a lot of success stories online about that, you know, they didn't use this exact process, but the essence is that they surrendered negativity within themselves and it cured their problem. So yeah, that's health problems. You can just ask with calibration, you know, is my health problem caused entirely or contributed to by negativity? And the interesting thing is, even if it's caused partially at the physical level, you can usually improve your ability to deal with that by removing negativity, because by doing that you'll give yourself more energy, more willingness, more happiness. You know, you'll be better able to deal with the tough parts of life that are just, you know, going with life. So even if your health problem is caused at the physical level, you can probably improve how well you deal with it by surrendering negativity. And another possibility, which I haven't really looked into a lot, but even for problems caused at the physical level, it may be possible to use other consciousness techniques to cure those problems. So one example, like I said in the part 1 video, I'm kind of researching manifestation and holding things in mind and using consciousness techniques to bring about the results you want, like Dr. Hawkins mentioned a few times. And so even if you have an issue in your life that's caused entirely at the physical level, you may be able to cure or at least address that problem by holding a solution in mind and then having it manifest. And an example is that there are many people online who use this technique to change their physical body. Yeah, there's people that are like, they're too short and they want to make themselves taller. There's some people that have said they change their eye color by manifesting it. They change their hair color. They change different things about their body by holding the result in mind that they want, and then you surrender the negativity that is blocking that result from manifesting. That seems to be the process. I haven't fully finished my research on manifestation yet. When I do, I'll publish the results. But yeah, and Dr. Hawkins actually said, he said in one of his old, I think it was his old Power versus Force video, he said that you can use your mind to change. Well, he said if you were to change the etheric body, which is the template for the physical body, then the physical body would change. And as it turns out, I've researched it a little bit, and it turns out the etheric body that is the template for the physical body is within the mind. It's actually within the layer of our spirit that is the mind. So by changing your belief and holding in mind the outcome that you want for your body, you can actually affect your body in the physical world using just you know, your mind. So that's a possibility, even if you have a health problem caused at the physical level. You know, let's say you were born with some kind of deformity or something. You might be able to correct that partially or entirely by using manifestation consciousness techniques. Hold in mind that your problem is solved and allow it to manifest. But that's a topic for a future video. I haven't really looked into that very much. With calibration, I've been focused on doing this process for myself mostly. And yeah, so in the future I might publish a video about that. That would be a fun topic. Also, future video idea, working with others. So I haven't really done this much, but I've done it a little bit. And it turns out that you can use this process with others. The interesting thing is that you can use it without them really knowing that you're doing it, which seems strange, but it seems to work. Basically, what you can do is, I've only done this like a couple times, so I'm not like an expert on it, but you can identify with calibration the negativity that is contributing to someone else's problem, and you can basically pray that that negativity be surrendered, and you can sort of surrender it for them by letting love sort of fill up the negativity and abolish it. I know it sounds on the surface like you're violating someone else's free will. You're like, oh, you're controlling their life, but actually what you're really just doing is praying for them and specifically identifying negativity within them and asking God to fill it with love and let it be gone. So really, it's not you that's controlling other people. You're asking God to help the other people, and it's up to God if that's going to work. But just an example is I used this process, the belief process, on my girlfriend one night. We were sleeping in bed, and I usually stay up late at night doing this calibration stuff while she's sleeping next to me, and I told her earlier in the evening, I said, I'm going to try doing this stuff on your beliefs and stuff, and she said, okay, whatever. And I surrendered like 6 or 7 negative beliefs of hers. I basically identified the beliefs, and then I asked God to remove them. And if you're successful, it can work. And the funny thing is, she was fast asleep, and then with the very last belief that I did, right as it fully surrendered, she woke up, and she was like breathing like frantically, and she's like, what just happened, And I was like, what, baby? And she's like, I just felt something weird, So it actually, I told her what I was doing, and she's like, oh, okay. But it actually had she noticed it, She noticed the feeling as I surrendered the last belief within her. And yeah, so that was interesting. Another example is a while back I had like a little problem with one of my roommates, and I was mad at this person, and then I said, you know what, instead of being mad at this person, I am going to ask with calibration how to improve this problem. And I identified with calibration that there was an energy field within this person, a negative emotion, not a belief, but just an emotion, that was contributing to the problem that I was having with this person, and I actually surrendered that negativity on their behalf. I asked God to fill it with love and let it be surrendered. And I did the letting go process only on their negativity instead of my own, and the problem at the time actually went away. The next day the person was behaving differently and the problem was gone. So yeah, that's a potential future video idea. I haven't done a lot with other people because honestly, just doing this work, it takes a lot of willingness to do this work, and at least for now I'm primarily focused on doing my own negativity, raising my own level of consciousness. Maybe in the future I will work more with others, I don't know. But yeah, so you can do this process on others. I'm not super, I haven't really discovered all the specifics of how that works, but you can use your imagination and try it out and see if it improves your life, see if it improves other people's lives. So I think that's all I have for this video. I don't really know what the next video I will be making is yet, but I think I'll be making one eventually about manifestation and one maybe about working with others. So thank you for watching.